You all look amazing. Well, hello. So I'm here to talk about how feminism is a man's game too. Right? Now, I'm sure that some of you are asking, like, what the hell does he mean? Right? The other question you're probably asking is, how does a former NFL player start doing work around gender advocacy, right? So let's answer that question first. So back in 2012, I was fired. I was fired from a job because literally I did nothing. My boss, he called me into his office one day and he said, Wade, tell me what you do here. And we both laughed just like you all did. And he said, well, I'm gonna let you go. And then they gave me a severance. And I was like, wow, I can live off of this severance and my $400 a week and I'll be okay. And a friend of mine said, why don't you do something with your life and maybe go volunteer at an LGBTQ organization? And I was like, maybe. Like, I wasn't open about my sexuality yet. I hadn't really told anyone that I was just a former NFL player who was gay. And I didn't want to be the fourth or fifth person who did that. But I walked into this organization to volunteer, and I walked out an assistant director of job readiness. Now, there were women there who had multiple master's degrees and PhDs and many years of service in this industry. But for some reason, just playing in the NFL, I got to skip steps. Some of you know what that might feel like. So I arrived there, skipping steps, and I was also an idiot. And I'll explain more about that later. So I was, as I mentioned, a director of this organization, which meant that I was in charge a lot of the time. And at dinner time, I was in charge of making sure that all of the young kids ate and that they left there happy and smiling. But one of my colleagues, she disagreed with a directive that I gave. And I looked at her and I said, sweetie, calm down. I told you I was an idiot. So she looked at me and she said, don't you ever call me sweetie. But what us good guys do is we go, wait a minute, you know what I meant. I'm not sexist. Sweetie's a term of endearment, right? So we come up with all these excuses instead of owning the harm that we caused. Luckily, I had a supervisor, a woman named Lillian Rivera, who called me into her office, and she asked me one grave question. She said, what do you think would cause Erica to respond the way that she did when you called her sweetie? And I gave her some really moist, silly answer, and she laughed. She reached behind her desk. She grabbed this book. Maybe you've heard of this author. The author's name is Bell Hooks. And the book was called Feminist Theory from Margin to Center. And she said, I want you to go home and read that. So I was like, great, feminism, never heard of it. Feminine's in it, it's for women, I'll figure it out. It's gotta be easy, right? So I go home and I read it in 2 days, I'm like, great. So I walk back into her office and she says, so what would cause Erica to respond the way that she did when you called her sweetie? I went, blah, 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 blah. She said, read it again. I was like, shit, right? So I go home, I read it a second time. I'm like, this time, I got it. I know I got it. I go back to her office. She asks me the exact same question. I give her a different stupid answer. She laughs even louder and says, oh my God, we're gonna be here all day. Read it again. So I look at her and I say, just tell me what you want me to know. Just tell me, because I don't get this feminism thing. And she says, if I tell you, it won't become personal. It won't become personal. So I go home with her thoughts in my head, and I read this book a third time, and about halfway through I realized, wow, this book is about me. Feminism is not just for women. It's a man's game too. It becomes a man's game when men realize that the elimination of gender inequality benefits us too. It becomes a man's game when we understand that our liberation is tied to the liberation of women. It becomes a man's game too when we realize that we are also harmed by sexism and misogyny. It becomes a man's game too when we realize that my previous statements are not hyperbole. And they're not hyperbole because, well, they are hyperbole to most men because we don't get to read books about women. There was no time when someone told me that I should understand the relationship between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass the same way that I should Susan B. Anthony and Ida B. Wells. No one ever told me that I should know who Grace Hopper is just the same way that I should know who Steve Jobs is. No one ever told me that there are 5,913 statues in America right now, and less than 400 of them are of women. And of that less than 400, over half are fictional characters. They're goddesses and ladies of liberty. No one ever told me that I needed to understand that Claudette Colvin's history was important, that because she was a dark-skinned, unmarried, pregnant woman, that she was not deemed respectable. And how could I ever understand that when people are fighting to keep Hillary Clinton out of the history books? Now, how would I ever understand these things when I thought that it was a different game? Because I thought that playing this game meant that I could only cry when stars like Kobe Bryant died. How could I play this game where I thought that a woman could emasculate me, that I never knew who Audre Lorde was, who said, if I define myself for myself, I will not be crushed in the imaginations of others? Because I have to know that I define my manhood and masculinity for myself. Therefore, no woman can take it from me by being her authentic self. I needed to know all of those things. But no one ever told me that it was a man's game, too. No one ever gave me a James Baldwin quote that when he was writing a letter to Angela Davis while she was in prison, he said, Angela, if they come for you in the morning, they will come for me at night. I didn't know what the asks were. I didn't know that the ask of women was not that men show up perfectly in our allyship, but that we stay in it. That we remain steadfast, that we must understand that when we say things like, sweetie, we will get a fierce critique and you must continue to come back and to keep fighting. The ask wasn't that I use my privilege as a man to empower women, because there's no such thing as a men's empowerment group, because it's axiomatic that men have power, but yet we believe that we need to empower women. Women do not need to be empowered. They need men to get the barriers out of the way that they face, and they will show you how powerful that they are. Because the ask of men is that we do, as Dr. Cooper says, we do the emotional labor to understand that sexism is an oppression that men face also, that it keeps us in boxes. And then we must also understand that we're not your allies, women. I'm going to say this slowly. Men can never be the allies of women. What we can be is your solidarity partner. And your solidarity partner means that I deeply, deeply understand that when men do the work alongside of women to co-create a world that is free of gender inequality, that we benefit too. Therefore, I am not your ally. I am your solidarity partner. And that means that I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that both of us are free and that both of us never have to deal with anything that impacts the other. Now, my ask of you is feminism still a man's game too? Thank you.